In this lesson, you'll learn about URIs, or Uniform Resource Identifiers, and how they're used in content providers. URIs are also used in other types of Android applications, so understanding them will help you with more than just content providers. As you recall, URIs are one of the objects used to specify aspects of our content provider data. The URI identifies a data subset to be used for data operations. The URI format is a standard maintained by the W3C, or World Wide Web Consortium. A URI is made up of a scheme identifier, followed by a colon, followed by a scheme-specific part that's custom designed for each individual scheme. A few examples are shown here: the HTTP scheme for web addresses, the FTP scheme for file transfers, the resource name scheme used for such data as ISBN book numbers, and finally, a content scheme for Android content providers. I've included links to Wikipedia articles on the URI and URI schemes if you'd like to explore more detail about general URI topics. And now let's focus on the content scheme specifically. The content provider URI scheme specific part is divided into three subparts: the authority, path, and ID, which identifies a specific data subset. To explain these components, I've included some sample code that can be used to assemble the parts into a URI string that can be included in the methods using URIs as parameters. Those are the query, insert, update, delete, and getType methods. And now let's look at the individual pieces. In the example, the scheme string constant is scheme, and is defined as content : // and it's identified indirectly using a constant in the content resolver class scheme.content. The authority string constant is authority, and it's the controlling identifier for access, and it's defined as com.google.provider.notepad, and it's used as the gatekeeper for protecting access to data. The path string constant is path note ID. Path is used to identify an individual group of data. There can be 0, 1, or multiple path elements. In our example, it's set to /notes. The ID string constant, sample ID, is set to /4. It specifies a specific row in the data subset, and it's an optional element. So putting all of this together would produce the string shown here: content com.google.provider.notepad/notes/4. And this example uses the parse method of the URI class to do the assembling. This method uses the parameters provided to create a URI. So it takes our scheme, authority, path node ID, sample ID to create this string. And now let's take a look at the code in our Notepad app to see how it defines URIs. The URIs in the Notepad app are defined in a class named Notepad, and it's shown here in Eclipse. Let's expand that window. First is the declaration of the package name. Next, it imports the URI class and a class called base columns, which contains the names of data subset columns that are common across applications. Next, we have the declaration of the Notepad class. It's a final class that can't be instantiated. In other words, its only function is to provide information used by client applications. Now, the first constant defined is for the authority for the app, which is com.google.provider.notepad, as we saw used in our sample graphic on content URIs. Next is a constructor for a Notepad that's empty because this is a final class and it's uninstantiable. Next, we have a class called Notes that implements the interface base columns. And base columns contains two identifiers for the data columns ID and count. Notes is also a final class and has an empty constructor. Next, we have the constant table name for the notes data subset. And next is the scheme constant designating our content scheme, content : //. Now we get into defining constants for the path parts for the URIs. We have a path for notes called path notes and a path for path note ID. Notice the difference between the two. The second has a / at the end. This is because it'll be used when a row ID is going to be appended on the end to specify a specific row in an ID part to the URI. Next, we have a constant defining node ID path position, and it's set at 1. Because numbering of columns starts at 0, this is actually the second column. Next is the path for a live folder. Live folders have been replaced by the App Widget API. We won't be addressing this capability in this course. Remember, the Notepad sample app is one that's provided by Google, and we're using it as is. As is sometimes the case with these sample apps, they'll have portions of code that you won't be interested in for your current application. Next is a constant for the content URI created using the parse method we discussed in the previous graphic. Next is a URI for content ID URI base using the parse method to construct it, and a URI content ID or ID pattern using the parse method with the slash at the end so that it can be followed by a row number. Now look down to the column definitions, and we'll be coming back to discuss these MIME types in a later lesson. So down to the column definitions. These define 4 column names: column name title, column name note, column name create date, and column name modification date. So these are the columns in our data subset. Now that's our lesson on URIs. We'll continue looking at URIs with a lesson on URI matchers to learn how to manage URIs in your apps.